Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about leading across borders in times of uncertainty. I find this topic absolutely fascinating, especially because of the times we're going through. And why is that? Uncertainty avoidance is just one of those things that triggers our most primal emotions. And in the midst of uncertainty, as we are today, anxiety is exacerbated. And this has direct consequences to how we make decisions, how we manage people. But there are differences. Different countries perceive uncertainty in a different way. This presentation is going to take about 35 minutes. I hope you really enjoy it. I have been looking at different companies during this scenario, and I find it very, very interesting. What we're going to be talking about is uncertainty avoidance, definitions for it, high and low uncertainty avoidance. I also want to talk about an example of two companies, one with high uncertainty avoidance and the other one with low, and how they approached lockdown. And then I would like to give you some tips that have to do with how to manage people during uncertainty avoidance, especially if you come from a culture that is highly avoidant. And also some tips for when we finish with this thing, how to manage people so that they become less uncertainty avoidant in the future. Okay, so let's start. I'm Georgina Barquin. For those who don't know me, I hold 3 nationalities and I have 3 cultures integrated within me, which are the Mexican, North American, and Spanish. I have over 17,000 hours experience training executives, and my greatest passion is behavioral analysis. So anything that has to do with analyzing how people behave, just love it. Let's start then. A little bit of an index, background, uncertainty avoidance and power distance, so how people deal with uncertainty and how people relate to people in power, and also tips on how to manage across borders. I want to talk about history and how we've shaped our values, because our values are going to determine how we take our decisions. So culturally and historically speaking, it depends on where you came from. If you were from up in the mountain where it was snowing all the time and cold and there was not a lot of food, certain behaviors were going to be positive for you to be successful. So parents or educators would educate you in what worked and what didn't work. If you lived down on the plain and it was really hot and it reached 100 degrees by 12 o'clock in the morning, then certain behaviors would take you to being successful. And those behaviors were going to be different. Now, initially speaking, or ancestrally speaking, people tended to live in the same area. So people around you looked similar to you and behaved similar to you. And we have a reptilian brain, and that reptilian brain for millennia and millennia has helped us to survive. And the way that it does that is anything that seems normal to us, it won't pay attention to. But the minute it sees something different, it will trigger an alarm and it will say threat, 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 so that we pay attention to it. So what we perceive as a threat is different depending on where we came from. Now, groups of people didn't move that much until mid last century. So we've only had years where people are really moving around and we're starting to really be global. But our minds still think that other people's behaviors are strange and that our behaviors are the correct ones. Our culture determines how we see the world and what we perceive as difficult. Some cultures perceive uncertainty as difficult. Others perceive it as natural. So what is uncertainty? Or uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance is the need to control the future. And societies that are uncertainty avoidant will try to control the future by creating routines, by finding comfort zones. Mistakes are usually frowned upon because why experiment if you already know how it works? Just do it the way we've known it always to work. There's paralysis through analysis when there is a big change because people from high uncertainty avoidance prefer to analyze situations very deeply before they take a decision. They tend to have a process-oriented mind frame. They like specialization and short-term feedback. So they will have someone who is specialized do something, survey how others do it, and then give them feedback, give them feedback. High uncertainty avoidance has a process orientation rather than a strategic mind. In low uncertainty avoidance, however, the perception is try it, see what happens. There's a trial and error. Entrepreneurship and geographical mobility tend to be higher. You learn from your mistakes, and mistakes are perceived as correct or perceived as good rather, because you've learned from them. For example, in countries where there's a low uncertainty avoidance, if you've set up your own company and you failed terribly and then decide to go and work for another company, when the person in that company sees your CV, he sees that you've tried many things, risked many things, and learned a lot of things, so you've become valuable. Whereas in high uncertainty avoidance, if you've made a lot of mistakes, you've set up your own company and you've failed, the perception is you failed and now you want to come and work here. So as I was saying, in high uncertainty avoidance, mistakes are penalized. In low uncertainty avoidance, they're a way of learning. In low uncertainty avoidance, people take decisions and then correct trajectory. They have a strategic way of thinking. So let's build up a strategy and then we'll correct as we get more data. Well, from these two perspectives, let's look at what the world map looks like. I'm going to give you an example of several countries. So I'm going to make this bigger because I can't see properly. On the left-hand side, you have countries with greater uncertainty avoidance, and on the right with lower uncertainty avoidance. Obviously, in the middle, there's a whole array of other countries. I'm just taking a few examples here. So Greece is the country with the highest uncertainty avoidance. It has 110 out of 120. Then comes Portugal, Guatemala, Uruguay, Belgium, Poland, Japan, Peru, France, and Spain. So the examples I'm going to give you are from Spanish companies. And that's going to be very interesting because Spain is at 86 out of 120. So imagine being on the further left-hand side or totally on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, we start with the United States being at 46 over 120. Now, from the left-hand side, the United States is perceived as being very innovative and highly entrepreneurial. But the further to the right we go, the less uncertainty avoidance they are, with Singapore being the lowest one. As I was mentioning before, it depends, your perception depends on where you're standing. If you were a typical Spaniard with an 86, anybody on the left-hand side will seem like much more uncertainty For the people that are on the right, a Spaniard would perceive them as way too, in quotes, adventurous. Let's look at how they tend to perceive each other. Now, remember this, there's a lot of big companies coming from the UK and the United States that have big head offices in the US, but that work worldwide. And the way that they want to make decisions and then implement them in other countries is going to have its barriers. So different approaches must be taken depending on where you are. Perception. Well, low uncertainty avoidance tends to perceive high uncertainty avoidance as slow deciders, insecure, over-evaluating, a little bit too conservative. So instead of having all the cake, I'd rather have a piece, try it out, see if I like it, and then I'll tell you if I like it or not. High uncertainty avoidance, on the other hand, perceives low uncertainty avoidance as way too impulsive, arrogant, and even reckless. Impulsive because they seem to be taking decisions way too fast in a almost reckless manner, and arrogant because I'm sure of what I'm saying, and if not, I'll correct it as we go. Okay, so as I was saying, when you hear someone talk about somebody else, rather than defining that somebody else, they're actually defining themselves. When I hear a person say he's very impulsive, arrogant, and reckless, what that person is telling me is I prefer to evaluate things more in depth, take as many points into consideration so that I can take the right decision. When I hear somebody, that person slow, insecure, and way too conservative, what I'm hearing is I have a preference for doing things differently and experimenting. Let's now look at two different companies within the same industry. High uncertainty avoidance at the left and low uncertainty on the right. So the company that I was looking at during the transition to lockdown in coronavirus, well, the one in high uncertainty, I could feel there was a lot of anxiety. People seemed to be thinking about what's going to happen, but no decision seemed to be made prior to the government announcing the lockdown. On the other hand, in low uncertainty avoidance, the company placed itself in the worst case scenario and planned for it 10 days before the government announced lockdown. They already had processes and procedures in place, and they even informed all the shareholders or stakeholders about these processes. In high uncertainty avoidance, the plans that were made once the government announced lockdown were short-term because the government said that lockdown initially was going to be for 15 days. So the company planned for the coming 15 days. They were taking one step at a time. Low uncertainty avoidance, however, as soon as the government announced lockdown, they emailed everybody with an email that they had prepared previously and that they named Gentle Reminder. They sent it to all stakeholders to remind them of what the process was going to be like. In high uncertainty avoidance, there seemed to be 2 or 3 diverging leaders taking the lead, which created confusion amongst employees. In low uncertainty avoidance, there was a small crisis management board, and it seemed like all the stakeholders had the freedom to make decisions and then rectify them if there wasn't a procedure in place for whatever was coming. In high uncertainty avoidance, low-level employees would follow the previous procedures, regardless of these procedures being useful or not, until they got new procedures. And this created great levels of anxiety, not only in the employees, but also in their clients and other people around them. On the other hand, in low uncertainty avoidance, employees knew what direction to take, even though they didn't know all the ins and outs, and therefore took decisions and then corrected if necessary. In high uncertainty, I could feel there was fear of taking unpopular decisions, so the power distance became greater. And you could read in emails messages such as, I don't take decisions, I just follow orders. So everything slowed down. On low uncertainty avoidance, official announcements spoke about unity, transparency, and all the issues that were being dealt with and all the mistakes that they were correcting. In high uncertainty, communication seemed to be intermittent because they would communicate, go silent, then communicate, then go silent. Whereas in low uncertainty, they made an effort of reinforcing communication. It was constant and ongoing, at least for the first 20 days of lockdown. In high uncertainty avoidance, emails mentioned what had been done for the transition and also said things that, for example, you could read between the lines that there was some type of excuse or complaint. And messages read something like, we have done a good job regardless of how sudden things happened. Whereas in low uncertainty avoidance, emails mentioned what had been evaluated, what improvement points they were making, and what follow-throughs they were going to have for the upcoming week. Okay, so you see the difference. Sorry for the mistake down here. Oops. There is a difference in how some companies act and how some other companies act. The thing is, we're in the middle of uncertainty and we can't change a culture when people are feeling anxiety, especially if they're coming from high uncertainty avoidance cultures. But there are things that we can do. For example, as a manager, working with people who have high uncertainty avoidance or in cultures with high uncertainty avoidance, slow down. You know, sometimes going slower will make you go faster. In Spanish, we have a saying which is something like, dress me slowly because I'm in a hurry. Meaning that if I get myself dressed really fast because I'm in a hurry, well, my button may come off or I may have some other trouble. So slow down, explain, explain, explain. Give as much data as you can. And if you don't have the data, specify that you don't have it, but that as soon as you have it, you will share it. Highlight the best behaviors. Maybe people are starting to behave differently in this period of uncertainty. And if those behaviors are being positive for change, well, praise them in some way. Allow for others to see your mistakes and speak about them openly. If you as a manager can make mistakes, so can they, or that's what they'll feel. And if you can speak about them openly, so will they. Spend more time with those who are more anxious. It is a moment of being aware of other people's emotions and being empathetic towards them. Plan for the worst case scenario scenario and look for the best options. And this reminds me of a case. I have a colleague who is working in Mexico, and what he was saying is that when coronavirus went into Mexico, a lot of companies started taking decisions in the same way that they used to for other types of crises. So Mexico's used to going through a lot of different crises, but those crises are different to a pandemic. So managers and companies started taking decisions that were very similar to the ones they took in other circumstances. For example, they started thinking, under crisis, we need to dismiss a lot of people. But the thing is, this pandemic may last 2 months, 3 months, and then yes, there's going to be an adaptation period, but what's the cost of dismissing people and then having to employ them again? So what other options are there instead of dismissing people? Some companies found that this was actually a better option than dismissing their people. So circumstances change, you can't make the same decision. Change your mind frame. Instead of thinking, can it be done? Start thinking, how can it be done? That's gonna bring or increase your creativity. Can it be done versus how can it be done? And then acknowledge other people's emotions. Do not lessen their emotions. If people have uncertainty avoidance, some companies try to act as if nothing has happened. Acknowledge them, give them the support that they need, explain, slow down, and they'll probably start coming out of that very powerful emotion that is anxiety. Once this is over, and if you decide that you want to have your team become less uncertainty avoidant, I can also suggest some tips. Obviously, these are just a few tips. There are many more things that you can do. Create a nomad culture. So what is a nomad culture? It's a nomad for knowledge, somebody who is hungry for knowledge and who is constantly learning. And you can do that by creating challenges, having people solve difficult problems, creating think tanks to solve or create new ideas. Lateral promotions. Maybe your company is not big enough and you can't promote upwards, but you can promote sideways. And some people are really into learning new things and going into other departments. Learning from peers. Promotions based on applied learning. So it's not a matter of you taking a course and then I can promote you, but I need to see that you've applied your learning and that it is working, or I need to see that you go through an expat process for you to be promoted. This is bringing people out of their comfort zones, basically. Flexi time? Well, manage your own time, come in and leave whenever necessary, but work based on results rather than just time. Ongoing improvement processes. Maybe you can assign 20% of your department's time on thinking of how to improve processes. Yes, the processes already work, but how could we do things differently? Designing your own career path. Well, some companies are enabling their employees to decide what their career should look like. And an idea is to make a pool of training courses and then ask individuals to decide which, for example, 3, 4, or 5 courses they want to take through the year out of that pool so that they can start designing their own career path. Flexi management projects. Well, I didn't know how to call this, to tell you the truth. I work in a company that is project-based, and sometimes my boss becomes my employee. Now, what this causes is for me to see my boss not as a boss, but as a collaborator, somebody that is there to help me and that I can help. When these roles are exchanged constantly, the relational dynamics change and they become much more agile. As mentioned before, create think tanks and also provide training. Well, I don't have much else to add for today. I will leave you my contact details. I have a YouTube channel in case you want to subscribe. And please do leave your comments, suggestions, or even questions if you have any, either on YouTube or on LinkedIn. I really hope you have enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon.